Hello friends, welcome to StudyIQ. In this video, we will be discussing a few important points on urbanization, affordable housing and city governance. So the reason why this topic has been chosen is because of the affordable housing campaign of the government of India and Mr. Prime Minister Narendra Modi with respect to providing housing for all. The Housing for All scheme aims to build around 2 crore houses for the people around in across the country, and to make sure everybody has a pakka house. On this note, there have been schemes like Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, rural and urban, etc. And it's a comprehensive program in terms of a lot of forward and backward linkages in terms of trying to partner with the banks, trying to partner with private entities, the government taking up the burden, etc. So on this note, let's move forward. Affordable housing. Construction sector remains India's second largest employment generator, and real estate comprises 20 to 30% of this, contributing to 5% of India's GDP. So, despite this demand, and investment is in a downturn, and affordable housing remains a myth. So, one of the prime reasons is why is land available and yet so unaffordable. So, with respect to housing per se, real estate, or in common terms, this has always been a deal which is taken up by the rich, and not or by the government per se. There has not been a lot of the middle income or the middle level businessmen or the medium scale businessmen trying to venture into this particular field. There are manifold reasons, but then you'll also have to be cautious about giving criticisms on this particular aspect, mainly because most of the criticisms that you might have with respect to stamp duty, with respect to clearances, with respect to non-availability of mechanisms, etc. They've all been dealt with the recent legislations in terms of the real estate legislation, and then with the coming of GST, the prices of cement is going down, and then the stamp duties are still a question. But then the central government is trying to grapple with the state governments to sort of make sure the stamp duties go down and then the registrations go down, etc. So you'll have to be a little wary about how you sort of comment or how you sort of use your criticism points. That's exactly why I would be sort of helping you out with how to sort of critique the government or where exactly to stop. So, with respect to employment generation, and real estate or construction sector is one place where now mostly unskilled people are being employed. But the moment there is some, considering the national skill development mission that's been underway, if there is some sort of a training to the unskilled laborers, and if they become semi-skilled, the productivity will increase, the efficiency will increase, etc. So thereby giving them formal venture, formal avenues of employment, etc. So moving on, affordable housing. So unfavorable land management policies such as the Urban Land Ceiling and Regulation Act 1976. So FSI, like I dealt with in the last video as well, a few technical terms, FSI, or floor space index, ceilings in different cities. So FSI is basically, to in simple terms, FSI is the part is the amount of built up area that you can construct in a given land. For example, let's say we have 1,000 square feet of land, and then you have there's a common, in common parlance they call it 2+1 or 3+1, etc. So let's say out of the given guidelines, let you construct a house for 900 square feet per floor. That will be the FSI, of that particular floor. And let's say they're giving you 3 floors. So in a 1,000 square feet plot area, you're able to build livable area of 2,700 square feet. So this basically is called floor space index. And the ceilings on this particular floor space index has been one of the prime reasons why we are not able to grow vertically, and the growth is mostly horizontal. Um, so there are a lot of cities that are still a little too conservative about not giving more than 5 floors or 6 floors of construction. Again, the cities also have their own arguments in terms of safety, security, etc. A few careless acts on the part of the administration have resulted in widespread destruction and then deaths. The best example could be in terms of the Chennai floods that have been a recent occurring, and then most of the areas where they have gotten 4 or 5 floors permissions have sort of collapsed on themselves because the land on which these particular buildings were built weren't, really strong lands, or they didn't have really strong soil to sort of hold the building together. So so on this note, there needs to be a careful extension of the FSI, and as a result, small low-rise residences and commercial complexes are being developed on each plot, leading to lower incomes for developers. So it's simple economies of scale again. So on a given 1,000 square feet plot, my fixed cost will be, because you're all banking students, so my fixed cost will be, let's say, X amount of rupees. So irrespective of how many floors I go up or come down, my fixed cost is going to be constant, and then the variable cost is going to depend on every floor. So with for example, say, let's say my fixed cost is 100 rupees, and then my variable cost per floor is 10 rupees. So if I'm able to build only 3 floors, so 100 plus 30 will be 130 rupees that I'm going to construct. And then if I'm able to sell each floor at rupees 50, so that's the profit that I'm making is 20 rupees. So and considering the fact that I'll be borrowing some money from outside, I will be sort of incurring a gestation period, and then interest in that point of time, and for it fluctuations in terms of labor, etc. So instead, if there is a 10 storied building that is allowed, so my fixed cost still remains 100, and I'm able to build 10 floors, say 10 rupees each floor, and 100 rupees. So 200 rupees is my investment cost. But then the revenue that I'd be able to generate would be how much? 50 rupees per floor into 10 floors is 500 rupees. So this, in terms of, with respect to economies of scale, FSI will play an important role in sort of these medium scale investors trying to sort of try their luck with respect to the real estate sector, and then there'll be a lot of new ventures on this note. Moving on, again, this particular criticism will not necessarily hold good in the time ahead, but for now I think it will still hold okay, because the issue of titling, in India, that's one of the biggest problems that we have. There are a lot of fake documents. If you look at the Supreme Court or the High Court or the lower court's cause list, or the cases that have been there in civil courts, there's been a lot of fake papers, fake transactions. A lot of people are cheated, and most of these are done on purpose with fraudulent ideas. And then bringing such people to book takes a really long time. In India, it's an open truth that a civil case will take a minimum of 3 or 4 or 5, or it's just in years. It's not even in months, because the main reason being a lack of conclusive evidence. So a judgment can be passed only with conclusive evidence, but then the problem is that the way our titling is done, land title, for example, let's say X owns 10 acres of land, but that title that he has, or the papers that he has, will not necessarily say that he is the owner, or in a conclusive fashion. It's just existential, or it's basically derived, and not really a conclusive evidence on which the court can say, oh yes, you're wrong, you're right, etc. So that's why it takes a lot of time, apart from the judicial delays as such. Overburdening of judiciary, that's a completely different subject altogether. So under Indian law, the registration of sale of land is compulsory, but the registration authority is not required to verify from the seller either the history of ownership or the land. So this weakens buyer protection and acts more as a fiscal instrument for the state, instead of being a statutory support of certainty to title. So there's no certainty to title. And then Urban India recognizes presumed ownership, a questionable claim which can be challenged. So like I told you, it's not conclusive evidence. It's basically a presumed title. It's not conclusive titling. It's presumed that, okay, yeah, because he has the sale agreement and he has one layer of documents, okay, yeah, maybe he's the owner. And that's again based on due diligence of the buyers and sellers, and most of these people are susceptible to be cheated with, and that's been happening. That's a reality in today's world. And but this won't, I like the reason why I mentioned it in the top, that this won't be a problem, is because of the NLRMP, the National Land Records Modernization Program. The government is trying, in fact, in cities like Delhi, there are cards being given to people, and there is a passbook that's being given to people with respect to how much property you own, who's the owner of the property, the history of who have owned this property. So the holding of that particular, those two documents, the smart card and the passbook, will say, or will tell you that you own the land in a more decisive manner than before. So yes, there is also a bearing on it also sort of plays the role of keeping in track of who owns how much, and to avoid benami transactions. But also, the NLRMP, the land records being, the passbook sort of coming in, etc. All of this is a welcome step. And then this needs to sort of the deadlines around 2018 and 2019. So in case it gets done by then, which is unlikely considering the extent that the vastness of the Indian territory, and then the number of people that have lands, etc. So even if it is a 2020 deadline, that could be met, it still will make a lot of change with respect to, and it will yield very positively to the real estate sector, to the housing sector, to the buyers, to the sellers, to all stakeholders for that matter. And then a few points, Hong Kong and Singapore, a few examples from around the world. Hong Kong and Singapore have institutionalized highly successful public housing programs catering to 50% and 85% of the population respectively. So social housing built through public private partnership projects could be developed to provide subsidized rental housing. Making rental income tax free could potentially unlock 11 million housing units. So now, uh, this is again, 11 million is again an estimate based on what's been on with respect to official data. But then it might not necessarily unlock 11 million housing units, but yes, it will definitely bring them out to light. Or it will definitely unlock a few, not necessarily 11, but then somewhere around half of it, 5 million or 50 lakh houses. The reason why I say it will not be 11 lakh or 11 million, sorry, 11 million or a crore, is because a lot of houses are being rented out on a cash and go basis. So with respect, and then these incomes are not really disclosed, and that's been the case with quite a few cities in India. So the number need not necessarily be 11 million. So around 5 to 6 million or 550 lakh houses will definitely come out. But again, making rental income tax free is again also again has far fetched implications in terms of reduced tax revenue collection, etc. But then if there is some sort of compliance, or if there is some sort of a positive vibe out of it, I think the government could still try this on a pilot basis, etc. Again, this is just a suggestion. This necessarily need not be taken up, because making income tax free per se is not necessarily important, because again, the moment someone is owning a house and is okay to give it out for rent, he's not necessarily someone who can't afford to pay taxes, etc. So this needs to be kept in mind. And again, institutionalization of public housing programs, and public private partnerships are important points that can be used in the exam, on social housing. So again, there have been a lot of business models in terms of owning a room, owning a part of the house, etc. Used as methods to fund real estate projects in India. So it's basic. So there are these tools wherein a fund is created, and then the people who buy, and then shares are given out over a given construction site, and a construction project. So and then the shareholders in turn get a part of a house based on how much they contribute. For example, if you buy 10 shares out of 100, let's say you get one house. If there are 10 houses going to be built, and there are 100 shares given out, if you buy 10 shares, there's going to be one house that you would own. If you own 5 shares, then maybe half of the house is given to you. So all of this has been seeing light off late, but then this needs to sort of spread in a rampant fashion, again with proper regulations, so that the poor or the needy or the targeted audiences are not cheated. For that matter, none of the audiences should be cheated. So so this so the regulation with and proliferation of such ideas or such mechanisms should happen on a large scale to sort of achieve or realize the dream of affordable housing and housing for all, by 2022. Moving on. India's real estate sector needs large funding, transformative infrastructure development, along with supportive regulatory and policy mechanisms to achieve social and economic objectives. Careful nurturing through policy action could catalyze India's affordable housing boom. Like I've mentioned in the previous video as well, so a concluding point on this note, will sort of give a good impression in the head in the mind of the examiner. And because it's this as such is a very comprehensive statement, and it isn't necessarily criticizing someone so starkly, but it still sort of does make a good example of a realistic sentence per se. City governance, and because cities are considered again to be an important part of the development agenda in the next few years, and at the current stage, so city governance is an area of concern. And so broadly, the action areas fall under 7 categories, at areas where there needs to be effort or there needs to be steps, and actions that need to be taken. So this has been forwarded by a lot of these particular 7 categories are an aggregation that are given by a lot of urbanization thinkers and urbanization analysts. so so starting with land, spatial planning and urban design, municipal staffing and capacity building, and then municipal finance, political leadership, transparency, accountability, and then citizen participation. These in a way are interdependent, and then when there is a problem with one, there'll definitely be an effect on the other. So like I told you, interdependence shows the systemic nature of the challenge. So for example, lack of adequate number of skilled staff in municipalities could lead to lower property tax collections and own revenues per se, but then the ability to attract quality talent requires financial self-sufficiency. Similarly, land and spatial planning are crucial for financial self sufficiency. But then, empowered political leadership is essential to harness those opportunities. So, for example, for the second point, I can give you an example of the metro corporation and then the land acquisition in the city. So, as long as the political leadership is not strong, land acquisition is not possible. And then, so when land acquisition is not possible, giving free, hassle-free transport and at a subsidized rate to the entire population of a given city will not be possible. Going on, the 3F problem. So the 3Fs are funds, functionaries, and functions. So I'll go in the reverse order. The functions are basically the authority delegated or devolved by the state government to the municipal bodies. So as you would all be aware, the urban local bodies or the local self government or the local bodies per se are come under the state list. So it's the prerogative of the state government to sort of decide on how much power they'd want to give it, pass down the governance hierarchy. And then so based on this will so this is a key aspect in terms of the efficiency and effectiveness of a local body. So if a given state government is a lot more centralized in terms of operations, then the local bodies will essentially sort of not be relevant enough because they wouldn't have functions in the first place. And then functionaries are basically staff, or people who'd be working for for the local government. So in most of the cases, the local bodies do not have the autonomy to sort of recruit their own staff. So 5 out of 6 staff, as far as I can sort of think of, are given by the state government. And with respect to the rotation in terms of transfers, promotions, etc., there is not necessarily a stable staff under the local bodies. So this will have an impact in terms of effectiveness in the long run. And then funds are really important to ensure the smooth flow of business, the smooth conduct of business expansion, innovation, etc., of the local bodies. So again, funds, they have to depend on the state governments. And moving on, cities need to be a national priority, because at this stage, both around the world and within the country, there is this aspiration to grow at a given pace, and then and in a given fashion. So considering these two, cities are the fulcrum around which the development agenda is planned. So it is very important for the government to sort of invest in cities in terms of legislative infrastructure, administrative infrastructure, financial infrastructures, and then and a lot of citizen participation, etc. And then the current approach of managing urbanization through smart cities and an urban development mission will not suffice. The reason being that these do not address the problem in a holistic perspective per se. They of course they do have their own benefits, and they are targeting a given aspect of urbanization, but with respect to city governance and then growth and development as such, just these two aspects will not suffice. Moving lessons to be learned. So the JNNURM has one useful lesson to give all of us. So the JNNURM, the benefits or the good part of it also became its bad point, because JNNURM believed in city level planning, and the idea that plans should come from bottom and not necessarily from top. That was a really good and a forward thought. But then that again depends on the kind of people that are doing the planning per se. So in cities where there were planners with a lot of foresight and thought, they reaped the benefits of JNNURM really well. But then where there wasn't much foresight and thought on the part of the administration, JNNURM failed miserably because the funds were just wasted, and then it didn't, and nothing happened there. Nothing credible happened there. And moving on, the government needs to ask itself whether these two missions answer the question as to how can our cities sort of guarantee acceptable standards of public service delivery and good governance to 400 million Indians today and 800 million Indians by 2050. So 800 million is a really big population that we are looking at, and considering the fact that the aspirations of the citizens will grow with time, the fact that the 400 the infrastructure needed to cater to 400 million Indians today will not be sufficient to cater 800 million Indians in the year 2050, even if it is doubled. So it needs to be something more than double, because the aspirations are growing also. The aspirations don't remain the same. So we'll have to look at the issue, or not the issue. We have to look at the responsibility with a lot of foresight and thought. And moving on, how do you go about it? The first step to solving a problem of successful urbanization is to elevate the conversation to a holistic level. So a holistic level meaning, like we discussed previously, as to how the city governance, the major aspects of city governance are interlinked to each other. When we sort of give the issue a bird's eye view, we will understand what are the important areas which, when tapped, will have a domino effect on other problems as well. So for example, the three F's, if we address the three F's, which is not much, in terms of which is not much in terms of utilizing a lot of staff, or utilizing a lot of resources. But these are a few structural changes which need to be catered to by a few people. For example, the state government, in a given state, instead of going and cleaning I'll give you an example to be very to make it simple. In a given state, if there is a water issue in every street, so if the state government decides to go to every street and sort of make sure the water problem is solved, that demands a kind of resource allocation. But then if it sort of tweaks its administration in a way that it lets the municipality sort of hire volunteers or casual or contract laborers or contract volunteers to sort of look at to look at the issue, and then it sort of it sort of lets the local bodies to involve or to partner with corporates. So that will not need a lot of resource allocation but it's sort of letting people do things, or letting the best person do things, instead of sort of using all the sort of administrative might to sort of deal with a small issue per se. And livable cities are a critical are critical today in to India, and then cities need to arguably become the fourth subgroup of Niti Aayog. This again can be a suggestion because like I mentioned earlier, they are important for the development agenda that we have in our minds. So considering Niti Aayog is a think tank and a facilitation center of the government of India. So cities being a part or be playing an important role within the Niti Aayog is a plausible recommendation or suggestion that you could write in your answer. And then cities bring together diverse but important priorities of economic growth and productivity, connectivity, jobs, skills, and talent, foreign direct investment, ease of doing business, infrastructure and public services, housing for all, poverty alleviation, etc. So considering the bearing that cities have on all these, and this sort of shows the importance that cities hold today or command today, and hence the suggestion above sort of holds good. Moving on, cities are central to meeting many of these development priorities, which are already a part of the union government's agenda. And the second immediate priority would be to learn from the recent experiences in Delhi and Bangalore. A serious discussion on how governance needs to be structured in a city is long overdue, and needs to improve, and needs to move to contemporary realities and needs. And senior levels of union government and chief ministers must engage in a fruitful discussion. So Delhi and with respect to Delhi and Bangalore, one common feature can be that can be touched upon is the way that the cities are not able to cope with developing aspirations. So the BBMP, or the Bangalore Municipal Corporation, or the NDMC or the DDA, etc. They just reach their saturation levels, and they are not able to sort of function beyond a given a certain point. But their capabilities or their potential can be tapped only when there is a lot more responsibility, or there is a lot more fund, and only when they diversify into various other fields and expand. But so while we are planning the mechanisms for local governments, we also need to look at or imagine the way a given city or a given urban area will sort of grow, and then sort of accommodate and make sure that the municipality or the municipal corporation or the local body per se is able to sort of take care or address those needs also. Moving on, and the outcome needs to be a broad set of principles and the architecture of city government that addresses the seven action areas referred earlier. So the state government, the central government, and then the local governments need to sort of come to common terms, and then make sure that there's enough authority passed on down to make sure there is a smooth transaction, or there's a smooth carrying out of business. And if this does not happen, we risk wasting collective energies, resources, and time redrawing municipal boundaries with zero impact on quality of life or housing or connectivity or any other of the development priorities. For example, something that's happened in Delhi was that we have almost four municipal corporations now. So DDA, NDMC, and then and then DDA and NDMC. Let's say. Uh, and MCD for that matter. So with respect to these three municipal bodies, there is not much coordination amongst these organizations. So these organizations are almost doing the same sort of work, but then there is not really an expansion or a diversification in terms of their own powers or their own authority or their own subjects per se, their own jurisdiction per se. So only when that happens will they be able to address the needs of the people and the aspirations of the people, or even act as engines that drive the central plans and schemes in a better way. So that's one important way of sort of looking at urban governance and the local bodies and the future of local bodies. And how to do this, housing, again, this is not necessarily an overlap, this is just a way to sort of move forward in terms of housing. And then India has been following the orthodox fashion of house building for the masses, in contrast to the industrial house production concept of the West. So this process results in standardization for starters. So instead of sort of giving contracts and to sort of people, and then they coming up with a plan, etc., if there is a standard procedure, for example, let's say a house will be constructed in 700 square feet of land or 400 square feet of land with one hall, one kitchen, and one bathroom, and then one room. So and 400 500 square feet will be allocated, and this is how the structure will be. And so if that is done, and then that will sort of help the industrialized process. So for example, and if the furniture fittings, etc., are all on a given level. So for example, if the entire kit of a house is decided at one level, so making raw materials can be done on an industrial level, sort of large scale raw materials can be provided, because those are the raw materials that will be used, and then with respect to tiles or whatever, the flooring, etc., the very making of raw materials will be channelized, or will be done on with to sort of cater to the needs of affordable or mechanized or industrialized housing. And then this will sort of ensure that the kind of workers that you need are also the same kind of workers. So, and the cost of construction will go down. So for example, if I'm trying to if I am one contractor, if A is a contractor and B is a contractor, and A sort of bids 100 houses for 100 rupees and B bids 100 houses for 120 rupees in their own respective areas, where they decide the plans of the house. So and if A manages to provide 500 square feet of land, or or two bedrooms or one hall, etc., and then B manages to provide something else, this again is not an A will procure from somewhere, B will procure from somewhere. There might be cost overruns, they might go back to the government, ask for money, or they might ask for extension. But on the other hand, if there is a common formula for building a house, so irrespective of it be A, B, C, D, etc., the budgets will be relatively same, depending upon the inflation or depending upon the transportation, with very few changes. But mostly the tenders will be on the same levels of price, and then the houses will look the same, etc. And then this will sort of improve the affordability as well. And on the social front, this promotes sense of commonality, which most of the international cities hold up as a distinctive trait. For example, if you go to London, if you look at a city like London, the houses of a given street look the same, and the way they are built, the way they are structured are also the same. And then on the periphery, this would also tap tens of industries that have forward and backward linkages to the housing sector, thus providing employment and to many, both skilled and unskilled. So there will be a separate industry that just makes raw materials, only for an aggregating industry that makes only for affordable housing per se. And considering there is a long way to go in terms of building affordable houses, these industries will sort of stay here for long enough. And moving on, there's also a version 2, the with respect to industrialized housing, there might not be there could be a few people that need not necessarily agree with this. So for them, there are also alternate ways, of coming up with affordable housing. For example, Laurie Baker is a pioneer of building cost effective and energy efficient houses. His vision was inclined towards using locally available cheap and renewable materials to build houses. If viable, adopting such strategy also could sort of break down garbage and waste problems of India by a number of means, such as organic composting, electricity from waste, higher levels of reusing materials, etc. So though this might seem really, really ideal or really normative, that's not the case. Laurie Baker is really famous in Kerala, and then there is also an organization called Costford. If you get time, please Google them, and they have sort of built houses on these lines in Kerala, with the help of by partnering with the local self government there, with the local government there. Moving on, transportation, another deliverable that a city should provide is quick, safe, cost-effective, and extensive commutation framework. Metros are a thing of the big cities, like I've discussed in one of my previous videos. So, but Curtibus, BRT, bus rapid transport system of Brazil, transports around 2.3 million people a day, which is 23 lakh people, and almost the population of our big cities. So planning early would come in handy, with respect especially to plan the roads of a given city. So if it's a relatively green field city, you could plan your roads based on the bus system. You need not necessarily dig up, you need not necessarily sort of build metros, etc. And once the numbers are achieved in terms of commuters, so once you have a lot of people, once there's a lot of demand, again, construction will happen based on the demand. So considering that the kind of customers that you looked at commute through the transport system put in place, the billboards, and then the infrastructure surrounding, that are inclined towards the transportation could be used as avenues for advertisement, and this will sort of make help them sort of cover their own costs, and so that the revenue generation, etc. So this is a self-sustaining asset. This will become a self-sustaining asset per se. At least the administrative costs or the day-to-day costs will be taken care of, and then and then the government will not be burdened with respect to covering all the expenses of such a transport infrastructure. And then moving on, livelihoods. As a city grows, informal economies begin to mushroom as a natural consequence. For example, street vending as a sector is growing at a steady pace in India. So, be it so the biggest of street vending places are in Bombay and Delhi. Chandni Chowk and the Bombay street food, etc. And then the fact that there's a national street food festival happening everywhere. Every year in Delhi is a testament to the fact that. Street vending is very common in India. So again, street vending constitutes one of the largest occupations of informal economies in Indian cities, and it's a complete system by itself that provides employment as well as products or services at affordable price at once. And then it's also an employment generator. This sector was criticized a lot by the resident welfare associations, by the local bodies, by the local administration, etc. But then there was something called the Street Vendors Act that came in the year 2014, which is a very comprehensive piece of law, legislation. So the act legally recognized the right of street vending, and in fact, there's a Supreme Court judgment which said street hawking or right to livelihood, not street hawking, right to livelihood. It was a case by a street hawker. So right to livelihood is a fundamental right under Article 21. So based on that and a few other objectives, the Street Vendors Act came in place, and the importance, the need of the hour is to sort of implement that. There are a few cities that have done it with a lot of zeal, and again, it is a very self-sustaining mechanism. If you sort of have it involves recognizing street vendors, giving them a dedicated space, asking them to take care of their own cleanliness, etc. And it's not necessarily, does not necessarily involve finding them or etc. It's more of a cooperative sort of a setup, and sort of helping them to coexist with the society around. And it also involves and it's a multi-stakeholder approach. With respect to the governing council will have the municipal authorities, the resident welfare associations, and the street vendors. So it's a really comprehensive piece of legislation that might need a few minor tweaks, but on the whole, it's a really good piece of legislation that just needs to be put in place. Moving on, concluding remarks. In other words, a smart city cannot be one grand affair, but 100 self-sustaining mechanisms. For that is when a city would be perpetual in its existence and dynamic in its development. And lastly, a smart city's evaluation should have social equity with a thriving ecosystem as a parameter too. So because again, Ambedkar has sort of blamed the villages for being dungeons of caste and social inequality. That's why he asked people to come to the cities, so that people would not know your caste, etc. But today, if you look at a few articles by the sociologists and a lot of studies, the caste system has somehow percolated or somehow has been passed on to the cities as well. So the idea of social equity should be a parameter in judging how well a smart city is fed. Otherwise, if you just have a ghetto or a slum right in between the city, or if you have one set of one part of the population being persecuted, not necessarily in a violent manner, but even in a non-violent manner, but on a very steady manner, it still doesn't make sense for it to be called a smart city, or for it to be called an engine of development per se. So Again, these two lines could serve as good concluding sentences, with so that you're not really which sort of will convey to the examiner that you're not really keen on sort of getting to the end, but also sort of paying attention to the means as well. So that's one way to sort of have come up with a composed answer per se. Thank you very much for your time. I hope this video has been of help to you. If there is anything that you would want us to help with, please write to us. Thank you very much for your time.